Welcome to Mastering the Art of Success. I'm your host, Debbie DiMaggio. We are here today with Adrian Wolfberg. Thank you for joining us today, Adrian.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
It's so funny. You never know what is going to spark interest in another person. And we had a cancellation for Thursday due to a timing conflict. And so we had people on the wait list. And when I got your email, I get a lot of emails since I wrote the book and since I've had the podcast. And there was just two words that connected me. And I said, Halima, cancel everyone else. I want to meet Adrian. I am so curious about you. There were two words, US intelligence and AI. And with those words, I was get him on the show. So thank you. You didn't have a lot of notice, and I appreciate it. So today on Mastering the Art of Success, I'm joined by Adrian Wolfberg, researcher, author, former US intelligence professional, and founder of Organizational Insight Consulting. Adrian has spent his career studying how individuals, leaders, and organizations make decisions when the future is unclear, the stakes are high, and information is incomplete. Drawing from intelligence, organizational behavior, and strategic leadership, he shares powerful insights on navigating uncertainty, improving decision making, and helping organizations think more clearly in an increasingly complex world, to say the least. Welcome. So glad to have you here. So I always like to start with when you were growing up and tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what your trajectory was to where you are today. Was there a defined path? Did you know that you were going the way you were going? And what kinds of things did you pivot and adjust to get where you are today?
There was no defined path. No, not at all. I think when I was like maybe 10, I thought I wanted to be a dentist. That's kind of the only thing that I think I thought about it at the time. Um, well, I think it was really at university when I got interested in the evolution of kind of humans and there was a professor who had a course in the transformation of modern culture and kind of went through the big cycles of human civilization change. And I had a chance just to focus on the Industrial Revolution. And what I did was pull together different perspectives about what was going on. And I think so that I used art, science, and literature and poetry. I used like three or four different perspectives that of people at the time who reacted to what was going on during the Industrial Revolution. And that was really the start of me thinking, having the need to think about everything from multiple perspectives.
Love.
That was, yeah, that was the start of that. And at the time, I didn't quite know what to do with that. And I thought, well, maybe I should just kind of experience what the, everyday kind of job would be. So I enlisted in the Air Force, and within like about 6 hours, I thought, man, what the dumbest thing I've ever done. And, and I was, but I was able to, I was able to, I got out after 18 months, but I was able to get back into an area that I actually first enjoyed, which was mathematics. And I was
Mm.
able to do enough uh, courses to get a BA in math from University of South Carolina and get accepted into Berkeley in a master's program in mathematics. But and at that time, I uh, I got interested in flying because I'd been in the Air Force, and I just kind of I somehow I got interested in flying, and I forgot about the math program, and I got accepted into naval aviation.
And that took you to DC.
And well, it eventually took me to DC over a number of years. But some of the key aspects from spending 8 years in the Navy was the idea of teamwork
Mm.
and the idea of what kind of the boundaries of teamwork is, where the outer limits of teamwork really extends to. So I was flying aircraft. So is teamwork just the people who are in the aircraft? Does it
Wow.
also extend to the people who maintain the aircraft on the ground? Does it also extend to the organizations that educate the people who maintain the aircraft so that you can fly in the airplane? So if you keep on backpacking, you get an extent, you get a sense of what are the important influences that may not have an immediate effect on being successful, but if those things go wrong, they will cascade through and make what you're trying to do not successful. So it was really kind of important to um, be able to understand that, and in the context that I was in, it was a little bit easier to do because I was on an aircraft carrier, and so it's kind of contained entity within a much larger organization and institution. So that was a big thing. Um, and then I got out of the Navy and worked for a um, electronics national contractor, and did two of those kind of stints. And I realized that I really was interested in not pushing the buttons on a computer to do things, but actually thinking about what's actually going on, um, that's that the computer is trying to solve. What are the problems that are trying to be solved by some kind of technology, some kind of computer system? So I, in the Navy, I was essentially an intelligence officer, and I had the chance to become a civilian intelligence officer in Washington D.C., which I did for a number of years. So in total, spent between the Navy and as a civilian 40 years in the intelligence community, U.S. intelligence community. And at the time, during that time, I was got involved with something that led me to eventually pursue a Ph.D., which I did, and kind of led me into a kind of a parallel track of not only performing in an organization, but analyzing what actually goes on in an organization.
Well, that leads
That's
me
kind
to
of
a
a
question.
broad overview.
Yeah, no, it's great. Let's dive a little deeper. What I liked what you said in the very beginning, which is whether you're a real estate agent like myself or whatever you do in life, the very first thing you said was you were you were looking at things from all perspectives, poets and from a cultural standpoint and from a business standpoint, and just you were taking that into consideration. And I know sometimes when we're negotiating, we're on other sides of the coin. You don't, I try to definitely take that and I coach on that is there's a seller and there's a buyer and there's a client and then there's usually a partner to the client. So there's so many pieces. There's a lender, there's a title officer. So I just love what you say, and I just want to point that out to people. It's you were looking at things from all sides, and I can only imagine that in this world and what's happening in DC and throughout the world right now, that if people would just see things from all perspectives. So during your time in the intelligence community, what lessons did you learn about decision making when the stakes are incredibly high?
I think one of the biggest things that kind of relates to what you were just talking about is I'll give a general answer and then I'll give a specific answer. But when you have, even just between two people, obviously it can be more than two people, when they come from different perspectives, the question is, how are you going to communicate? how are you going to bridge different languages in a sense? You know, what I mean by the word glass may be something different by the
Right.
word glass that you mean. You may think about it as a window because you're thinking it from a real estate agent. I'm thinking about it from something that holds water, and I drink
Yeah.
something. So that's just a very simple example. Um, so, so the general idea is if the work environment consists of people from different perspectives, which I don't think is a controversial statement at all. I think everybody would recognize that, not only from the roles and skills that they have, but from their personal upbringing that they've had. So then the question is, how do you actually reach some kind of common understanding, which which means how do you establish a common language that everyone can understand, the stakeholders involved with whatever the problem or decision or work, whatever the context is, whatever the sector is, it's all the same problem. And so what I learned as a intelligence officer within in that kind of context that I was describing of the different perspectives is how does one, as someone whose responsibility is to deliver information, of course behind that is you have to create the information, but once that's done, and that is then my responsibility then doesn't end just there. It then requires me to communicate that to someone who's living in a different world. They're not, you know, they're making decisions, having all sorts of different inputs that they need to be concerned about that are on a totally different scale than dealing with bits of information and putting some kind of conclusion together about this is what's happening in the world. Their their perspective is probably going to be overwhelmed with what resources do I have, what's an acceptable action going to be, um, what should I recommend that we do? So, who else is telling me things that I should be doing? Blah blah blah. So I learned well, not very quickly, but through trial and error, to the best that one can, to understand the needs, the informational and the decisional needs, and the timing of those decisional needs of the person or people who need the information to make a decision. So the language can be crafted in a way that's not too complex, but not overly simplified, so
Mhm.
that they get the gist of what's important, so that they can, in their own language, apply it to their decision making process that they need for people in their kind of um, chain of command, or their areas of responsibility. So that's, I think, probably for me, what was of most interest to me. I think another thing that I learned, so that's kind of like an external
Mhm.
way of representing myself. I also learned an internal way of dealing with information from more of a cognitive perspective, and that is a way of continually testing myself as to whether my understanding about what's going on is accurate and complete. So there would be a continual, what am I missing? How can if I think this is true, what things would be out there to invalidate it? So there would be this constant feedback loop of continual questioning until I felt that I had, I was confident in what I was coming to. And this came to a head at one point. It's just an example. when it was a time when I was responsible for providing information to the White House, and it involved a number of different inputs from various departments and agencies. And each of these, like any organization or any sub elements of an organization, everybody has a certain stance from what they think is important and what they want to protect, whether it's resources, reputation. Um, but those are kind of the two main things. And I found that the the new knowledge that was coming about contradicted some of the agenda items of what some of these organizations felt were degrading or violating their their organizational integrity. In other words, putting them on notice that this is in their mind and their interpretation, that they were looking bad. So the knowledge was making other organizations look bad. So I was not influenced by that. I was threatened to lose my job because of that, but my organization stood behind me. And it took me a year to canvass these different organizations to finally provide enough data and evidence and rationale and reasoning for them to say, oh, okay, yeah, I guess you're right, Adrian. And then they agreed to that. So from that, I learned this idea of persistence,
Mm-hmm.
and that in the face of failure, I mean, this is many people talk about this lesson, but this was you asked what things that I gained from it. That was one of the things I gained. So yeah, it was constant reflection, persistence, and the need for shared language to get the job done.
Yeah, I could imagine just I'm having my book translated into Spanish now, and I'm working with the gentleman, and so much can be lost in translation, right? I mean, even in the English language. So when you're having these meetings and these debriefs, are you sitting at a big table? Is it just you doing it, or are you sitting with other people you're speaking between one country and the next, and you're trying to get this information to someone? You have interpreters. What does it look like? What's a day in your life look like when you're trying to get the right message and craft just the right message to Russia or Iran or Afghanistan or whatever? Give us a real life example.
I'll give you an example. The context that well, I'll give you two examples. So sometimes there's an external actor that you're interacting with, but most of the time I was involved with internal players who were managers of the system. But I'll give you an external example because that's kind of what people think about.
Yeah.
Um, so I was this is when I was working for the White House, and I was asked by a cabinet member to um, to go to a foreign country with a group of people and speak to the president of that country who didn't speak English, and um, convince them. So I was part of an entourage, but I was kind of the key actor in this, and to convince the president that we knew what he was doing, so that he knows that we know, and therefore he will stop being a bad actor. And
Just like the
so,
movies.
yeah, yeah. So I don't have a commanding language of Spanish. This was a Spanish speaking country. And he didn't have a commanding language of English. And there was a certain amount of risk, quite a lot of risk, in depending upon translation that you
Oh
just
yeah.
talked about, that that I would have to depend upon the translation of my translator, and he would have to depend on the translation of his translator.
Oh,
So the the method of transferring this information that was needed for him to change his policy um, couldn't be words anymore. They had to be visual.
yeah.
So basically, I had constructed one slide that had no words on it, but it was kind of like a picture, and it just showed things that didn't require translation of any words. It was devoid of any language, and it was obvious within 5 seconds that he knew that we knew what he was doing.
That he didn't think you
And
knew.
so, right. And so the entourage, so that was basically it. That, we got what needed to be done. And I think it was a month later that the cabinet officer met with the foreign secretary of that country to then um, create a deal of cooperation, which was then implemented. So that was an example
Yeah.
of
And did you know
um,
these, so the translators, is this a translator that you know and trust and have a relationship and rapport with? Or is this a just you're going on this trip and here's your translator for the day? Or did you have a
yeah,
relationship?
no, it was the latter. So that's why from the
Wow,
get-go there was a certain planning emphasis to not depend on words.
got it. That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, you
Now,
don't know what they're
um,
saying, how they're saying it, and what feeling, feeling. I'm Sicilian. I talk with my hands. It's like, what's coming across. Is it a German guy coming across? Translating. What sort of yeah, the demeanor is so important, and the inflection, and the right words, and the
well,
right.
and also you don't know what the relationship is between that employee who's the translator and the president of that country. There's a huge power difference, and
Right.
you don't know if the translator is going to modify what's being said to meet the personal needs of the president. Who knows. So anyway,
Yeah.
that those things were all factored into a strategy of how to present the information.
Any chance you could tell us the visual that you shared?
Yeah, it was a map, a skeleton of a map.
Okay.
I could draw it right now on a piece of paper and show it if you want.
Yeah.
um, it was just like, here would be,
Yeah.
two countries. That was the
Uh-huh.
kind of the extent of it. And on that, I just overlaid um, the path over a period of a year of um,
Mm,
movement of certain conveyances.
I get it.
So if this was his country,
Yep.
then this was a country that he didn't think we knew about, then right away he could see that
Got it.
we knew about it.
A picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yeah, in that case it was. So that was an example
All right, we're going to go to
of,
quick commercial break and we will be right back with Adrian and his amazing story. So we'll be right back. Thank you.
Did you know that your beliefs create your entire reality, but it's the subconscious beliefs that do most of the creating? Belief shifter and life coach Shiraz can help you identify those limiting beliefs and eliminate them, often in a single session.
Like it was almost instant, like I had relief right away.
Creating better health, relationships, careers, and finances. Let Shiraz help you step out of safety and into awareness.
Definitely something's happening. It's like a flow inside. It feels good.
Whether in person or online, Shiraz provides personal coaching, belief shifting. Visit Shiraz at energeticmagic.com or call 416-529-7429. Energetic Magic. Find your greater happiness. Be well. Be aware. Be magical. Mike Zorek, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorek, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorek has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk.
Welcome back to Mastering the Art of Success. We are here today with Adrian Wolfberg, and he is sharing with us some intelligence secrets of past. So you were going to share a second story with us. I love this stuff.
So before the break, I talked about like an external encounter that you were kind of thinking about. That's what people do. And that is what people do. Most of the time, it's an internal encounter. So this is an example where I was involved with the planning of a operation that could have easily involved loss of life. And my role was in the intelligence arena, in understanding from my perspective, it was understanding everything that could go wrong, so that if I saw something was going wrong during the operation, I could alert people right away and reduce any chance of people getting harmed. And so this was a planning process that um, involved about, I think, 3 months, 3 or 4 months. It was kind of like a full time thing. And I knew exactly, we knew exactly when the operation was going to start and all the details about it and so forth. And I was monitoring things that I was supposed to monitor. And I noticed something peculiar that was unanticipated from, I guess, anybody's perspective.
And
And I
so,
was
Bill,
working with,
how are you doing that? Are you listening? Are you watching TV through monitoring? How are you getting this information? How are you seeing
this,
this happen?
this information is being displayed on a monitor that consists of electronic and communication pieces of information that's displayed for me with associated details about that information. And um, I was working during the operation with a team because there were other people besides me also involved in supporting what was going on from different perspectives. They each having different kind of specialties and responsibilities and so forth. Maybe a dozen people, maybe it was more like 15 or 16. And there was a supervisor in charge. And so I went up to the supervisor and said, I think there's something, going on here that needs to be raised to the people doing the operation. And so I told him what it was, and he said, "Well, where did you get that information from?" And I said, "Well, I analyzed the data that was coming to me, And I made the conclusion based on differences that I've seen in the past versus what I'm seeing in the present. And he said, "Well, you mean you didn't get a message, someone telling you this?" And I said, "No." And so he
Wow.
canvassed the other people in the room and said, "Has anybody else received any message that is saying what Adrian is telling me?" And they all said, I'm just kind of paraphrasing this, that they sort of said, "Oh, no, it's nothing like that's happening. We're getting no indications." Some of them kind of laughed and, how could you know this? And I was really upset by that. Upset, not that I was emotionally upset, but that I felt that the mission was at risk because people weren't listening.
Right.
So I can't remember exactly how it happened, whether I initiated something offline or someone communicated, but someone who was in charge, who was from the office, who was in charge of the operation, came to me, physically came to me and said, "Come with me." And and said, we have to walk about a minute. And so I'm going to tell you that when we get to the destination, you need to tell your story in less than a minute about
Wow.
what's going on. And I said, well, I said, you know, I wanted to know who the audience was so I could, prepare myself. So he said, all you need to know is that you need to do it in less than a minute in a way that this individual will understand the importance of your information. And so we he opened the door, and it was a small, from my recollection, maybe a room that was 20 by 20, a small room. It was dark. There was a platform, and there was a man sitting on the chair on a platform, and it was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who's like the most senior military
Wow.
officer in the United States military. And so I did my spiel in less than a minute, and he understood it because I had, practiced how I would communicate it. And he immediately informed the people doing the operation to be to heighten their situation awareness so that they wouldn't get surprised. And so that's an example.
That's incredible. Oh my God. I just have all this huge visual of shows I've seen before. I've seen that scene before in a movie. Absolutely. Um, and what did you see? Was it you saw someone doing something out of the ordinary? Was it a mannerism? Was it a facial expression? It must have been so subtle because only you picked it up.
Yeah, it had to do with a pattern of behavior. It's a phrase that's used in the intelligence community these days that's applied to to humans. Um, in other words, being able to understand exactly the behavior patterns of an individual. They leave the house at 7 a.m. They get on their motorcycle. They go to the coffee shop at 7:30. They then do this and they then do that and they this. That's what I mean by pattern of behavior.
Right.
Well, I was looking at the pattern of behavior of a military activity. Um, and that's all I'll say about that. So it wasn't about an individual, but it was about kind of a behavior of something that was related to military activity that only I had been looking at. Um, and because that was my responsibility as part of this planning operation. I mean, no one knew that I was supposed to look at that, but that was just my
Your training.
responsibility,
And did
my
did it,
training.
did
Yeah.
it was the outcome, was it a good outcome?
Well, yes, the in the sense that no one was harmed. Um, there was, one of the contradictions of the intelligence business takes place with this thing called warning. So what I did in a sense was I warned our folks of some kind of bad thing, and if they hadn't been warned, they could very likely have been killed. Well, the contradiction is that if you are successful in warning something, they will not be killed. So, is the warning successful? Well,
Right.
it's hard to say a negative is successful, but because they didn't encounter harm, that's always a measure of success to the best degree that we can come by. That's a much better measurement than to say, oh, well, we didn't have the right information. Gee, I'm sorry they got harmed. Well, that's always a bad thing.
Right. Absolutely. Um, so, how could someone take what you learned in the intelligence um, profession to someone could take that to the boardroom, to their real estate practice, to just anyone in business? How could they translate that to be better at what they do? Their skills that
It's
can be
Yeah, so it is directly applicable to anything where humans are involved in any kind of, um, I was going to say organizational setting, but I think like a formal organization, but it probably is true with voluntary organizations or, you know, possibly even, familial or those kind of things. And so I think the keys are um, understanding what the decision space is. And so, what I mean by that is if you're providing information to a board, what are they thinking about that's important to them? What is the time frame in which they are contemplating this decision? What information is important to them in making this decision? And what is it that I could one could do that is not fully known to help them solidify or improve their understanding of what they need to know within the time frame and their decision space to make a better decision. So I've seen this. Not obviously, this is something that um, started on my path, but through the research that I've done, I see this all the time with every layer of and many different contexts, whether it's in um, military uniforms, whether it's in civilian, whether it's in professional sports, whether it's in strategic planning in business. It's all the same. These are all the same issues that have to be thought about, and that if you're going to be successful, you have to figure out how to answer all these questions that I just said, because otherwise you're just going in blind, and you're just going to be, you know, you're just going to be torn apart, or not torn apart, just disregarded and or
right.
laughed at, maybe inside or not. Um, so it's this importance of mission in whatever walk of life you're involved with, to understand all these different facets. You can call them perspectives, but these facets are then overlaid on top of individual perspectives of how they're thinking and they're interpreting in their language and so forth. So it's a really a multidimensional space that you have to navigate when you're involved with dealing with knowledge and making decisions based on knowledge.
Great. So with that, tell us about your new book. What's the title of your new book? And give us a synopsis of the book that you've just written.
Yeah, the title is Who Leads When AI Thinks?
Mm,
And this is about changing the conversation about AI from a technology stance. And so what I mean by that is um, almost all of what's being talked about in AI now is about what can it do, what can it not do, what are the governance about AI, um, how do we train AI? So it's all about the transactional aspects of using the tool itself. That's occupying the conversational space. Because of how I've come from my background and my research and my practitioner experience, I'm taking a step back and I'm saying, let's change the conversation and figure out what it is that we want AI to do. And so, from that perspective, I'm addressing how do we sort out what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Um, how does it change? What's the right combination of human and machine thinking to solve a problem, and how will that change over time? Because everything changes, problems change. Because in the military, we have a phrase, strategic, a plan that you have lasts as long as it has contact with the enemy. And as soon as you have contact with the enemy, they're an actor and they have a say in what's going on. So, they're not going to just respond as you think they respond. Um, there's many real life instances that I'm not going to talk about now, but can be seen in the public space, today. Um, so it's really a book about what's the problem, what's the right, how do you figure out what the right mix of AI contribution is, and then what are the competencies from a human perspective as a leader that are needed to navigate this trajectory of leading the decision making about the right mix between human and machine collaboration. And so it's not technical at all. There's
Mhm.
no engineering. It's really about it's a leadership book about how people to provide I provide frameworks to help them think about how to act when you want to use AI to support you in any kind of problem solving project.
And so let's go back to leadership. How can leaders create environments where people feel comfortable challenging assumptions and sharing different perspectives? They kind of challenged you on that last example you gave us. They didn't think you were accurate. So how can leaders create environments where people feel comfortable challenging assumptions and sharing different perspectives?
Yeah, so this is especially important with AI because as it's well documented now that um, there are certain limitations. I think there'll always be limitations about what AI knows, what it can do. And so, what I mean about what it knows is what's going on in the world today in terms of how humans are interacting and um, uh, not only interacting, but pressures that are involved, agendas, politics, all sorts of constraints. Um, so there does need to be, and I mean, I think I'm, speaking to the choir. Um, you know, there's this term called psychological safety that's, came out of Harvard about 20, 25, 30 years ago, and how important that is to allow people to speak up who may be in a position to actually understand what's going on better than the person who is at the top of a hierarchy. I mean, we know that the people who were at the leading edge of whatever the problem solving is going on, whether it's at NASA who were bench engineers or bench scientists versus the head of NASA or in the military or in a corporation, it's those people who are at the edge who are usually the first ones to understand where there's something changing in reality, and that therefore the presumed approach is no longer working, or no longer working as well. And so, how then do you voice that um, into the system so that there is a chance to adapt? So this goes to adaptability, to why psychological safety is so important for organizational adaptability. Um, and I mean, probably preaching to the choir, but in an organizational setting, sometimes the pressure of speed and time, negates. People forget about the importance of listening to what people are saying is going on. I mean, there are so many examples of this in the military, in politics, in organizations, and it's really tied to adaptability. I don't know. I think that's kind of a high level answer.
Do you want
I'll
to give
just
us an
stop there.
example? Just give us one example from the military or politics, or just share one.
Well, like for example, what we know about. Well, I'll give you an example from my own personal experience. Um, I I I led a internal consulting organization inside the government to directly address the problem of not having psychological safety, to be able to feel comfortable in raising issues that were preventing individuals from having successful outcomes. And to some degree, the people who were in the management structure um, reacted negatively to this because they interpreted as a call out that the managers were not fixing the problems. The problems were being identified. The managers were not fixing it for various reasons. And the managers then felt embarrassed because of the head of the organization would then find out that they weren't fixing the problem. That was kind of an internal dynamic. So, fortunately, the head of the organization um, agreed to a plan to create a forum to allow people to. It wasn't a complaint session. It was, I have a problem completing my job. I've not been able to solve it. Um, is there, I would like some help solving it. Can anybody who's listening to me, including you, the head of the organization, and anybody who's sitting around me, can you help me solve this problem? So this was an example of the head of the organization, the leader, allowing the the hierarchical structure to be silenced first, in a sense, and to have a complete opportunity for um, pure psychological safety, to have a purely collaborative approach to solving a problem that had not been even addressed, and if it had been addressed, not solved. So this was a program that went on for 3 years. We had a 50% success rate in terms of over 350 problems that were raised.
Wow.
And when we benchmark that to any industry similar type of feature, which to some degree you can think about the complaint box or the suggestion box as being some kind of primitive version of this, but some organizations had a more sophisticated version of that. But even those were lucky to have a 5% success rate in implementing solutions that came up from the bottom. So I could see then from that experience how successful, first of all, leadership involvement and leadership ownership is in supporting the movement of ideas upward and outward. So it's not only vertical, but it's horizontal, to help people become successful because people want to be successful in doing their job.
Right.
Nobody wants to be unsuccessful,
Right.
and this then became a way of dealing with problems during the course of this project.
Well, I think that is a great system that they implemented and more companies should. It's so true because there's so much talent and knowledge, but oftentimes leaders, they don't want to change. And especially in our government right now, so we should have that implemented in the government. But we are at the end of our time. How do people get your book? How do they get a hold of you, Adrian? This was incredible.
So Amazon right now, whatever country you're in, it's readily accessible. It's about $25-$30. Um, and the best way to get a hold of me is LinkedIn, to message me there or through my website, www.oicllc.org. But certainly everybody knows what LinkedIn is, and you have my name. And
Yep.
so
And I will
the
put it
book
in
is okay.
the link, the notes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Adrian. This was so fun. I could take this offline for hours and ask you so many questions offline where it's safe for you. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, and I appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Debbie.
Tune in each week for another episode of Mastering the Art of Success with host Debbie DiMaggio. Thursdays, 2 p.m. Eastern. Real stories, real strategies, real success.